Hey everybody, it's Craig Syracusa, Walk in Faith. I'm so excited to be sitting down with Teresa Tomeo, who is an author and syndicated Catholic talk show host and motivational speaker. I'm reading your bio. It says you have over 30 years experience in TV, radio. Thank you so much for, just taking the time to sit down with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, it's actually getting, I hate to admit it, but getting closer to 40 years because I graduated from college in 1981 and been working professionally ever since. And it's even scarier if you count my years in college broadcasting and high school broadcasting. I don't even want to go there. So, but it's been a long time, and God's given me a lot of really good experience in the media, and I'm grateful for it.
That's funny. I know. I started off in the business when I was 16, 17. I joined SAG and Union when I was 18.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, so I've been doing this, I tell people, like 20-something years professionally, and I'm turning 40 this year. So, yeah, it's a long road. It's a long road. But thank you so much. So just out of curiosity, where are you now? What state are you in?
We live in Michigan. We're in the Archdiocese of Detroit. We moved from the East Coast. I'm a Jersey girl. I was born in Jersey. We moved when I was young, so I was raised here in Michigan. But my whole family, much of my whole family is still on the East Coast, some in Manhattan, most of whom, though, are right now living in different areas of New Jersey. Let's see, we have Madison and Patterson, primarily where my family is right now.
Wow. We're neighbors. So like I said, I mean, I get a lot of books. I read a lot, and I didn't really have anything on sort of just in my library on books that really spoke about the coronavirus and the anxiety and the fear that we all have, and what networks to trust and what prayers, and it was all this communication, and you never know who to trust and what websites to go to. And then I came across this book, Sophia, they sent it to me, and I couldn't put it down. I mean, honestly, I just kept reading it, and I love it. And there's so many interesting things I want to talk about. But the first question that just jumps out, which, first of all, I don't believe in coincidences at all. That's something I always speak about. And then there was a question in the book that you wrote. I'm going to ask you this. What has the storm exposed or revealed about your own life, or the way you're living, or even the way you use your time? So what has this experience and writing this book sort of exposed in your own life?
Well, for me personally, I think it really was a reminder to make sure that I'm practicing when I preach, because I've been through a lot, and my life story is very interesting, and what God has done in my life in terms of very successful secular media career for 20 years, anchorwoman, reporter, making the transition when my husband and I had our reversion, getting back into the church, and then getting into Catholic media, where I've been now for almost another 20 years, and always telling people that, if God brings you to it, he's going to see you through it. And then when my mother was dying during the beginning of this pandemic, and I had to let God of an awful lot of stuff, I felt God saying, okay, well, especially those of us who are on the front lines of ministry, we really have to make sure that we're practicing what we preach. And I'm not saying that God is bringing us trouble or pain because he wants to zap us and test us, but he is constantly giving us an opportunity. And I see this as a big opportunity. So much was hitting me, Craig, when I started to cover this story on my radio show on Catholic Connection on EWTN and Ave Maria, where I was interviewing all these wonderful priests who are reaching out to their parishioners, people doing amazing things in terms of sacrifice to reach those who were isolated, or those who needed food or help or medical care, whatever case it may be. And I was so moved by it. And I said to myself, we can't forget this, because we have such short memories. And you know about it, being in the secular media, how we move from story to story so quickly, right? Something will cover the news for days, weeks, even months. And the next big story comes along, and we get comfortable again, and we go on with our lives. And because this was such an equalizer around the globe, worldwide, I really felt the Lord saying, okay, are you going to use this, the platform that I've given you, to help people understand how I'm trying to get them to use this as an opportunity? So I think that was a lesson for me, and a lot of tests that I had to go through myself. And it's very frustrating, because here in the state of Michigan, there's a lot of problems, and I don't want to get into politics, but we know that there are people on both sides of the political aisle who are always going to use things for their advantage and as a power grab. And we're seeing a lot of that in Michigan, and a lot of people are struggling. And so how do you incorporate your faith into that? How do you deal with it? And I think the Lord was asking me to really help people go through this. And I'm all about the resources. Being a journalist, I like to give people places to go to And I'm old school. I really like books. And so I said, I want to put this in a book for them, and I want them to have resources. And so, as you know, in the back of the book, there's tons of resources, both secular and Catholic resources, to help them through this.
No, I love it. I think you and I definitely have a lot in common, more than you probably think. So I also worked in the secular media, and then had sort of a spiritual awakening,
Mm-hmm.
where I came back to the church and more of and built a strong foundation. So I left the secular world, same thing, and then sort of transitioned into the Catholic media space. And the same thing during this time, I said, and I ask myself this question every day: am I a walking contradiction? It's something, if I'm going to sit here and we're going to preach and we're going to talk about it, is everything in line? I'm living or working towards living a holy life. My
Right.
actions, my thoughts, my deeds, everything needs to be in line. Otherwise, I'm doing more harm to somebody else if I'm living a contradiction. So as I was reading this, and I'll tell you towards the end, when I was looking at all of, you mentioned like some of the sins, and I started to really evaluate that. And it got really, because when you read scripture, what it does is it exposes your own sin. So as
Right.
I'm reading that, I said, wow, there are a lot of things here that I need to highlight, which I'll get back to another day. But the book itself was just, it opened up so many just possibilities. And during this pandemic, we have the ability to use this platform, social media, like you're doing, write these books to really evangelize. And I commend you for it. And one of the things too, as I was reading, you mentioned about fear. And it's something that
Mm-hmm.
I think during this virus, this pandemic, if you put the news on, there's so many ways that we can be overwhelmed with fear. So, I mean, do you think, can we truly have faith but also be afraid? Do they go hand in hand?
Well, I think we know in scripture in the Old Testament, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's a good fear. And that means that we recognize who God is and who we are not. So I think that kind of fear is healthy. I think we have a fallen nature. We're humans. So naturally we're going to be afraid of some things. We're going to be afraid of a rabid dog on the street, or God forbid, if someone runs a red light, we're going to be fearful at that moment. But I think what we're seeing now is we're being inundated with so much negativity. And you know this, being in the secular media, it's like they don't want to let this story go, because if you keep people afraid, there's a reason they still say, if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, let's be honest, it's a business. And they have a vested interest in keeping us afraid. So I think a healthy fear of God, in the good sense, again, not that he's zapping us with this pandemic, because I don't believe he caused it. I believe he's allowing it for ultimate reasons that only he knows, and that we kind of have to go along and figure out, okay, we're going to grow through this. But the fear, I think, that is healthy is to understand that God is above all of this. It's interesting you bring up the fear factor, no pun intended, with the television show, but I'm getting a lot of emails from our fellow Catholics, and people are so consumed with fear. And these are Catholics who are solid in their faith. And I'm sure maybe you've seen this in your work for the Diocese of Brooklyn, where people are writing me and they're fearful of what's going to happen if their loved one dies
Mm-hmm.
without the liturgy. They're fearful what's going to happen to the soul of that person, what's going to happen to the person who's writing me, what's going to happen to them if they can't get to confession, or if they can't get to receive Jesus in the Eucharist physically. And then I have to kind of like talk them off the edge, so to speak, and say, look, do you know that God can, although obviously he works directly through the sacraments, he's aware of our circumstances. And we are being obedient to our bishops, who are trying to protect us physically. And they are taking on the responsibility as our shepherds, which is not easy for them. And my husband's a deacon, so I have a very unique perspective on this, to make sure that their flock are safe. And so they're providing events like this. They're providing stream masses. They're providing all kinds of online events. But I'm finding that the fear is so prevalent out there in the culture that people, and maybe by no fault of their own, they're just overwhelmed, are forgetting that we serve a merciful God,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not going to punish us, or we're not going to be responsible for being away from him physically, if we can. Just like if you can't get to mass for a good reason, not that you're sitting at home watching a football game or you go
Yeah.
shopping, that's totally different. But think of it in that sense, because, for example, let's say you're traveling somewhere and you have every intention of getting to mass when you get home, but your flight gets delayed by 3 hours and there's no mass around. Now, did you intentionally miss mass? No. So we have to remember that our faith, our Catholic faith, is so beautiful and encompasses God's mercy. And the fear that I'm hearing right now is, again, people fearful of what's going to happen if they don't get back inside the church right away.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, one thing too, I mean, what I've learned during this time is I used to go to daily mass, right? And it was something I started doing later on in life, and I didn't realize how much I missed the Eucharist I didn't realize it. And then when I wasn't able to go, because at first we were able to go, and then they kept changing the rules in New Jersey, and then sooner or later we weren't allowed to go at all.
Right.
And I realized after a few days how much I really missed the Eucharist. And, I'm honest, there are days when I'm afraid, and I've learned always to have a routine. I don't turn the news on. I'm never, overwhelmed, and I don't get influenced by what the media says. Anytime I'm afraid, I recite scripture, but sometimes it's hard, and you continuously build a relationship with Jesus Christ. But the one thing too I've noticed, which in the beginning, the first couple of days, first couple of weeks, I was getting emails from people that I didn't even know had any faith at all, prayer intentions online. It was beautiful. I know it was Lent, but then I've noticed, like anything, like a habit, it started to drop off.
Right.
And then the emails, and then the messages were conspiracy theories, were all the negative thoughts. And I asked this question 100 times, and I'll keep asking it. We developed this relationship with Jesus Christ during this virus, but how do we sustain it? You and I have a relationship that we work on every day. People don't understand it's a lifestyle. And I'm noticing now people started this habit because it was popular to talk about God. And now it's like, let's put him back in the closet. So how do we continuously build a relationship with Jesus Christ way beyond the pandemic?
That's a great question. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I really wanted to help people strengthen that relationship, because everybody, even the most faithful Catholic, is feeling challenged right now on a number of levels. So I wrote the book for it to be evergreen, even though we're looking at the pandemic, looking at it from a faith perspective and how do we conquer it. This is a long-term thing. First of all, because this pandemic and the fallout from it is going to be with us for we don't know how long. And obviously it's going to be, up and down. I interviewed an excellent doctor from the East Coast, from Rhode Island, Dr. Deacon Timothy Flanagan, who's been working with the church on the rollout of opening the parishes again. And he believes we need to get back out there and live, but he says we also have to be wise about it. We have to be careful, and we have to do it in stages. And so that's what I think is really important to understand, that we can build this relationship with God and trust. So what do we do? Okay, so we work on this, we do what we can, and we go back to church, but we have to keep praying. The long-term thing is what is going to matter. What are we going to do in the long term? Because this pandemic is not the only crisis. God, please, no other pandemic. But we can't get comfortable with saying, okay, the pandemic's over, we're back in church, where the kids are back in school, isn't this great? Life goes on. We have to remember what we're learning. And the most important thing that we can learn through this is that God is with us. Mm-hmm. We are not alone. And that our faith has to come first. Our relationship with God has to come before everything else. Our relationship with our spouse, our relationship with our children, it starts with God, and then everything flows from there. So that's the main point of the whole book, not only during the pandemic, but beyond, because number one, the fallout is going to be with us. And number two, there's going to be some other, again, a little mini pandemic in our own lives that we're going to have to deal with. So this really, I think, is strengthening us. It's like a really good long-term workout in the sense of giving us an idea to build up that strength. So what can we do? Well, again, great point. And I say this in the book, and this is, I teach about this. I've written 15 books, most of which always have something about the media, because I do a lot of media awareness seminars. Is not saying that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and never watch secular media again. But where do you think all these conspiracy theories are coming from? People are going to all these different websites because they want definitive answers. Mm-hmm. And so they're consuming all of these things continuously. And I'm getting the same thing. I'm getting, what about this conspiracy? What about that conspiracy? And they're lumping it all together. And because the goalpost does keep moving, unfortunately, and a lot of even the medical experts don't even know, because this is a new thing that hit us. This is a novel virus, a new virus. And so there's no definitive answers, except now we know, for example, how it's passed on, and we know what works a little bit and what doesn't. But we're still kind of figuring it out as we go along. So people want definitive answers. So if they can pin it on, let's say, a conspiracy theory, then maybe they can feel better. Mm-hmm. But I think what the Lord is telling us is that, look at me, look at me, keep your eyes on me. Jesus, I trust in you, the divine mercy. And once we do that, it can calm us down. And the other thing I tell people in terms of strengthening the relationship with the Lord, the scripture tells us, don't forget what the Lord has done, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what keeps me going, because my life is one miracle after the other, because I should have been struck down by lightning, to be perfectly honest, 25 times in my secular media days, because I was so far away from the Lord. I was claimed I was pro-choice, blah, 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 nonsense, that I never even investigated what I claimed to believe in. And I was an investigative journalist. But God has done so much in my own life, saved my marriage, led my husband into the diaconate, gave me an entirely new ministry, We were just talking about that every day. Our life is a miracle. So I remember those things. Do not forget what the Lord has done. And I think that's what he's calling us to do, to strengthen ourselves every day. But of course, making sure you're making good media choices,
Yes.
limiting media access. You don't need to be watching. And I'm you're probably the same way, being from the news business. I'm somewhat of a news junkie, and I have a daily radio show, so I have to keep up on it. But trying to back away every once in a while and not watch the secular media and just keep yourself generally informed. Take in good media. Sometimes don't take in any media at all. Be quiet, be silent, go outside with the kids, do what you can in whatever your restrictions still are, but enjoy the time with the family and make sure you're reading scripture every day. Read the mass readings every day. My husband and I started doing that when we came back to the church, and we still try to do it, and we're pretty good at it. And it really helps keep us balanced and keep, proper perspective and focus.
I totally agree with you. I do limit the amount of time I put the news on. We have a 4-year-old, and every time the president's on or he hears something, he thinks it's the president. So I'm realizing that, what we're taking in, he's also being influenced.
Right.
I don't want my fears to be projected onto him, because I don't want him to build that foundation so we don't put it on anymore. And as we build a relationship with Jesus Christ, certain things, whether it's certain conspiracy theories or it's certain networks, you see that you're not really interested in anymore. I noticed that a lot of the things I used to like, as my relationship continues to grow, that I'm not interested in anymore. So I don't worry so much about believing these conspiracy theories. Or when I see these 5G, it's the cause of 5G now, I'm like, I know that that's not from the Lord. And you mentioned in the book, and I think, which is great, so during a crisis, there's opportunity, right? And I think the church, the Catholic Church has stepped up dramatically, streaming mass online, Bible studies. I'm doing more now, watching more masses now than ever. And you also mentioned, and I interviewed priests about this, let's say an average mass gets 600 people. They're getting thousands of people. I know Cardinal Dolan mentioned in your book too.
Right.
25,000, 30,000 people, and not even to say how many people, first of all, are able to watch in the community, but also within that household. I think this time we're planting a seed in people's belief system that people might feel uncomfortable going to the church or might not want to go because they feel, is this the right place for me? The seed is being planted. When life gets back to the new normal, I see an increase in vocations, an increase in living a selfless life, going to mass. I see an increase. But will the church continue to stream mass online? Because I know they'll be busy. Will they continue to use Instagram? Will they go back to, the old methods of technology that the church is used to?
No, I don't think so. I think they're going to keep doing some masses online. As a matter of fact, our Archbishop Alan Vigneron just put out directives just recently, because they're going to be starting masses again in the Archdiocese of Detroit, and he wants the masses online to continue. He's encouraging pastors to do that, and he's also suspending the weekly obligation until Labor Day weekend, because he knows just what you said, and that's a great point, that there are some people who are not comfortable yet coming back to Mass, whether they've fallen away Catholic or someone maybe who was just introduced to the Catholic faith because of the availability, or maybe it could be an elderly person, someone who's concerned about their health, or maybe it could be someone else who has some pre-existing condition that says, gosh, I really want to go, but I need some time to think about it. So I think the church, in her wisdom, is being very merciful and very wise in keeping these things available. Now, some people are concerned, and I think this is a valid concern on the other side of the coin, is that, well, because online masses are so quote unquote easy, right, to attend, basically, that, I don't need to go back to Mass. But we have to continue to catechize to make sure that if you're healthy and you can get to Mass and it's being offered, if the obligation is now put back on your diocese, you have to follow your shepherd and make sure you're following the teachings of the church. I do think this will continue. I'm hoping it will, because I think they're realizing, for example, my parish, we have about 320 parishes in the Archdiocese of Detroit, and my parish is very large. And my pastor is so funny. We call him Pastor Techie, because he's just one of those guys that knows like the internet really well. And so he started streamlining masses, the 4:00 p.m. on Saturdays and the 8 a.m. And we have so many people. We have people, and this is just one parish in one archdiocese. We've had people from Brazil, from Poland, from China, and from Guam, that have been watching Mass, in addition to people in the area and people in our parish. So it's just beautiful to see what's happening. He's having me do a teaching series, a streaming teaching series on the book, and it just started last week, and people can just go to stjoan.church, and every week I'm going to be teaching on a different chapter of the book. So far, it's been up today, I'm thinking of today, but it's been up for about 3 days, And we have now almost 3,000 views of the first talk I gave, which is pretty good for an online event. So I do think they're seeing the benefit of this, and that some of that will continue. I sure hope so. I think it's very needed, and I don't think we can go back, because so much now has been exposed in terms of, as I say in the book, the surveys and the research that shows, as you said in the beginning, there was that interest. We have to pick up on that, because we have to do an outreach. I also talk in the book, as you know, about 9/11. If you remember 9/11, almost 20 years ago, there was a spike in church attendance. Masses were packed. People were concerned. All churches were packed, not just Catholic churches. We weren't, I don't think, as I say in the book, I interview a prominent Catholic evangelist, I don't think we were equipped back then to handle the people who walked in anonymously, literally just off the street, coming back into the church, or maybe just wandering in because they saw the cross. So we weren't ready to do the follow-up, and a lot of those people drifted away when life got somewhat back to normal. We can't let that happen again. There was too much of an interest in terms of the people literally searching for God right now.
I agree. And I was actually going to bring up that point, because the way you explained it is just great about the 9/11. I mean, I lived through 9/11. I don't know if you were in New Jersey at that time, but it was a very difficult time, and there was an increase in mass attendance. And then, like you said, it did drop off. I think this time will be a little bit different. I really pray it does. And also, what's interesting too is we talk about in the diocese and in the New York area, we talk about bringing church to the people. How do we bring church to the people? Well, we create content for a younger audience or a demographic, and what's always talking about, we put it on television. But the demographic that we're trying to reach, number one, are not on television.
Right.
And the content we're creating is not relevant to that demographic. So we're always trying to figure it out. It's like, how do we get to the youth? We use the tools that we have, the technology we have, the platforms that we know they're on, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever you want, and create content for that audience. And now we're doing that, and we're seeing an increase. And I truly believe that this is going to really make an impact and a difference. And I think we'll find less people that consider themselves nuns or spiritual,
right,
which people don't understand. And maybe you can clarify, when someone says they're spiritual, but I'm not religious, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think, just speaking from my own many years away from the church, not really. I think it's a lack of, maybe even by no fault of their own, not knowing what it means to be religious. Also, I think being fearful of what a religious commitment would look like in your life. Because once you say yes to Jesus, we automatically think, and I did too, that he's going to take so many things away from us. But he may put us in a different circumstance, as he did with you and as he did with me. But aren't you much happier now than you were when you were back in the secular media?
Filled with
right?
joy. Yep.
I can't even imagine, Craig, that I would be. I never thought about it. I always thought that the only thing I could ever do was be a news reporter. That's how I was trained. That's what my degree is in. I've been on live news since I was, since birth. I mean, people still recognize me from my days on TV news in Detroit, and I had like the big Rosanna Dana hair, not the short hair I have now. I could never have imagined the platform that he's given me. No way. Now, he didn't give it to me right away. It was gradual. I had to keep growing in my faith and be open to what he offered. But God, you can't outgive God, and don't put him in a box. Mm-hmm. And I think, just from my personal experience, understanding where that mentality comes from. Oh, I'm spiritual. A couple of things. Again, I think people are afraid to really know what it means to be religious. They look at God maybe as some ogre, or a very limiting person who wants to squash our fun or our goals or our desires. Number two, unfortunately, sometimes we haven't done all that great of a job of explaining the faith and being good witnesses. And I think we have to acknowledge that the abuse crisis has had an impact. But even throughout all of that, if you think about all the things the church has suffered with the abuse crisis, people are still turning to God, yes. Right? I think a person who really understands that we're all fallen, they can look to God and see the big picture. So I really, really believe that this is an opportunity. And those people who don't feel that they're spiritual, as you said, if they're watching the Mass, you're going to be drawn into that. Yes. I mean, my parish, and I know it so well, and yet when I'm watching my husband, I pick a Mass, if he's serving at the 4 or the 8 o'clock, he goes off, and then I watch him read the gospel, and it's really kind of fun to watch him on TV as opposed to him always watching me on TV. And I'm noticing so much more about my parish, even the physical structure of it. that I hadn't noticed before. The beautiful mosaic of St. Joan of Arc, which is my parish, and the beautiful image of the risen Christ on the cross, or the way, the ambo, or the way the light reflects on the mosaic, and all these different details that I'm noticing that I didn't notice before. That beauty, the beauty of the actual churches, the inside of the sanctuary, which people are seeing all over the world, various churches, we can pick up on that beauty. And I believe people are going to be drawn to it. Even the people who say, well, I'm spiritual, not religious. There's that old saying, there's no atheist in foxholes.
Yes, yeah,
And that's why I think a lot of people are searching right now. Yeah.
I always like to, everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
So, also too, I think during this time, like as a kid, I grew up in an Italian family. If we didn't go to mass, punished. My mother would not let me go outside if I didn't go to church. My grandmother would do devotion to mass. And, as we get older, some of the generations that are out now, the kids, they go to sports, they don't really have that same foundation that we had growing up or I had growing up. And I think this is the time we're home.
Right.
We could really, everything is, all the idols, everything that we thought was so important, whether it's social media, whether it's going out to dinner, whatever you idolize, the way you use your time has been stripped away. We have like a reset button. We have the ability now to proclaim the gospel to our kids, to really spend quality time, to sit down together at dinner and talk and not, think about all the things I have to do. And I think even your pastor or associate pastor said, I'm going to sort of paraphrase it, but it was about the good old days. And it's something that I mentioned earlier to you was this to me is like when my parents said the good old days. Now, would you agree? Do you think this is sort of a time for us all to reset and really redirect our focus and have a clearer perspective?
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting, being a fellow Italian American, obviously, that the word corona in Italian and Latin means crown, right? So what are the crowns, as you said, that we've been placing and putting a high priority on in our lives? And you were referring to my associate pastor at my parish here in the Archdiocese of Detroit, Father John Benton, who gave a beautiful homily early on and talked about when he was growing up, if they watched a movie, they watched it together in the living room, and they picked it, and it was a special movie, and they sat around the table together as a family. In my very first book that I wrote many years ago, it's called Noise, How Our Media-Saturated Culture Dominates Lives and Dismantles Families. And what I talked about was, and it's got a ton of statistics in it, I talk about the Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse out of Columbia. And the former head of that organization said way back then, and my first book came out, over 12 years ago, he said, if I could get parents to have dinner with their children just twice a week, uninterrupted with the media, and this was 12 years ago, cell phones, video games, just to sit there and have that real FaceTime. This is before we had FaceTime. He said, I would see a huge decrease in the number of addictions among teens, because that communication between the parents is so important. This is happening again where families are getting together and sharing. And if kids didn't understand the Mass, what a great opportunity to sit down and ask your children, where would you like to go to Mass today? What parish in Brooklyn? What parish in Jersey? What parish? Maybe you want to go over in Italy and watch the Holy Father celebrate Mass. Because it's online, you can do that. And then you can help them and explain the parts of the Mass. I have a friend who lives in South Carolina, and her grandkids are very close to her, and they come over every weekend. And the one boy is old enough to be an altar boy. And so he dresses and prepares as if he's serving at Mass. And they get all dressed up, Sunday Mass, and they go to Mass still together as a family. What an impression, and what a great lesson you're giving to your kids and your grandkids.
I love that. I watch multiple Masses on Sunday. I go for my walk every day, which is sort of like me going to the gym. I just need that alone time to meditate. And my family, they all watch St. Ignatius and Bensonhurst, Brooklyn at the same time. So it's interesting because sometimes I'll comment, I'll say, hey, Mom, even though we're in completely different, we're like 40 miles apart, but we're able to be together in community, which I love. One thing that, I thought about if I should ask you about this, and then you brought it up earlier. I know during the beginning part of, I think it was March, your mom passed, which I've spoken to a lot of people that lost several family members, and I know it's been very difficult. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Were you able to have, I'm not sure what was happening at the time in the state, were you able to have the proper funeral, wake, burial?
Well, I'm glad you asked me about that, because that's a part of the book that I really wanted to share. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because of what I was going through at the time. Things were changing so quickly. Mom passed on March 19th in the Feast of St. Joseph. And we knew that she was going. She had been struggling for about a year. She didn't die of COVID. She died of congestive heart failure and kidney problems. And as she was getting worse and we put her into hospice, things were starting to shut down. Okay. So she went back into assisted living in hospice care and then passed away on the 19th. Now, the 19th of March, we were still able to have masses with the 10 people, only the immediate family. And then our parish would live stream the mass, which I thought, well, that's great because all my aunts or sisters in New Jersey could then watch because they were too elderly to travel. But then literally, Craig, overnight that changed. And within 3 or 4 days, maybe even a week, they kept going back and forth and they were trying to figure it out. I mean, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying it was such a guessing game still early on. And my wonderful pastor was saying, well, if we hold off a few days, I think we can still do a mass. And I said, okay, well, that's all right. We can wait. We were trying to figure out if we can get some of the relatives to come in from out of town anyway, a few of them. And then we just had to, he said, you know what, we just can't do it. So we ended up not having a funeral liturgy and just having the graveside committal. And the wake was literally only 8 of us in the funeral home, separated for social distancing. And it was a really let go, let God moment, several of them for me, because for my father, and being from an Italian family, you don't have enough chairs in the universe when people are coming to a wake. And we have a big Italian family. I have a lot of friends here. At my father's wake at the same funeral home, my uncle, Stefano, and my Aunt Mary were telling funny stories growing up in New Jersey in the Italian neighborhood, what it was like, Rossanello's Bakery, this, that, the other thing, and the Calabrese Club and all these stories. It was like a big party. There must have been, I don't know how many people crammed into the room. And this is going through my mind as I'm sitting there before my mom, and there's only 8 of us. And we had to keep, the social distancing, and the funeral home was wonderful, but they had to be very careful. And I'm doing my whining to God. I'm like, really? This is Rosie. You couldn't do better than this. Come on, Lord. Doesn't she deserve this? You want some cheese with that wine. So that was one thing I had to let go. And then I had to let go of the fact that we couldn't have mass at all. She had the wake was very small. It wasn't even really a wake. It was just our chance to say goodbye. And then the graveside committal, my pastor was there. It was very quick. It was a proper Christian burial. But at the same time, it was so small compared to what my dad had. My dad had the big full mass with the choir. He was a choir member, and we had a luncheon, and the wake was amazing. And my heart just broke. But then I had to think about, again, well, wait a minute. Mom is okay. God's taking care of Mom. She lived a holy life, and she was a good woman. And God willing, I believe that she's in heaven, hopefully. I'm the one who's feeling this here. And I had to remember that God can work outside of all of this, and that when the time came, we will have a mass. And maybe we can my pastor even told me just recently, look, he said, we can still live stream it so your aunts can see it in New Jersey, not a problem. So God works everything out, but I really had to let go. It was very hard, but it was a great lesson. And I wanted to share it with people that God showed up. And on the day my mom was buried, she died on the 19th. She was buried 9 days later. And the day she was buried was actually the birthday of my patron saint, Teresa of Avila. And I wasn't even paying any attention to that. Right now, if anybody knows me, she's Saint Teresa of Avila. You can see the picture I have behind me. She's my girl. I mean, she and I, our personalities, not that I'm a saint, but our personalities are very much alike. She's very Spanish. I'm very Italian. I just love her for her writing and everything else, but her feisty personality is what really keeps me going. So I wasn't even paying attention. I mean, I'm probably the president of her fan club, if there is one, but I wasn't even thinking about the fact that it was her birthday. And when I got to the cemetery, it was a very dreary, cold, rainy day in Michigan, and they were lowering my mother's coffin into the ground. And what you had to do because of social distancing is the workers at the cemetery would lower the coffin, they would step back, get back into the trucks, and then we could get out of the car, keep safe distancing, and then our pastor would do the committal. And so I'm just like so sad and felt so alone. And all of a sudden my phone starts going off and there's text coming in. And it's my friends saying, we're praying for you. We love you. We're with you. And then 2 of my friends said, don't forget what today is. And I'm like, what's today? And they said, it's the birthday of your saint. And I'm in the car, Craig, and I burst into tears because that was God's hug saying, I got this. Okay. And then the other thing, one more thing, the connection between St. Joseph and St. Teresa. My mom died on the feast of St. Joseph, and then she was buried on St. Teresa of Avila's birthday. St. Teresa had a huge devotion to St. Joseph. So see, God is above all of this. And if we can just step back and, keep an open mind and open heart, even with stubborn Italians like me, because I was in my own misery, my own pity party that morning, but he was speaking to me through St. Teresa and speaking to me to two of my best friends that were saying, hey, hello, this is a God wink. So it was rough, but I really felt I had to write about that experience for people.
Wow. And so would you say, I mean, like you say in the book, and like we said, I don't believe in coincidences. There's no way that's a coincidence.
No, there's no way.
There's no way. It just doesn't happen. But when you realized that, were you able to have some closure?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's what
it made all the difference in the world. It calmed me down. And I was like, and then I wanted to hit my head against a brick wall, because it's like, how many times has God done that for me in my life? I mean, I write books about that stuff all the time. And yet when you're in the middle of that very sad, very painful moment, we're human and we forget. And then I started crying. I'm so sorry, God. I'm so sorry. I felt so bad. Right. But yeah, it did calm me down. It made me cry, because it was a grateful cry. It was a joyful cry and a thankful cry, because it was like, not only did he give me the love of my friends, but he gave me a hug from my absolute favorite saint, the saint after whom I was named. So, I mean, if that's not God, I don't know what is,
Yeah. And too, when you have those moments, I know, at first, like you said, you were crying, and it's very emotional, but there's also that gratitude. It's like,
right.
Thank you, God, because
Yeah.
like you said, we're human, and there's noise. Like one of your books, you mentioned his name of noise. There's so much, the enemy. There's all these distractions. If God really loved you, why would it rain today? Why would this happen? Like you said, the pity party. And then when you have those moments, whether you call them aha moments or whatever, it changes you in that area. Like, you say, wow, this has opened my eyes to just completely different perspective, because that's something I've spoken to a lot of people that have lost people with the COVID. One story, a friend of mine, devout Catholic, went to World Youth Day with him at the Pope, the whole shebang. And he lost 5 family members in a week. And he's young. And I couldn't, his grandfather, his father, his whole family wiped out, Italian family, in 1 week. And he's only 26, 27. And his devotion and his foundation of faith was, it was inspiring. I never thought, and he learned so much from this experience that he's able to give his testimony and share with other people that are going through similar situations, or I hope that they don't. But it's amazing in these moments. So, before we go, there's so many things that I learned from this book, and I don't just promote books, just to promote them. This book is fantastic. I know it's not really possible for every parish to carry it right now, because we're not in the parishes. So what is the one thing that we can learn from this pandemic, coronavirus, but also from this book? Maybe it's the same. What would it be?
Well, I think it's a continual message that we have to embrace as we started this interview, is that we have to, as my pastor, my spiritual director says, all things Christ. We have to keep our eyes on the Lord, the author and finisher of our faith, as it says in Scripture, and to remember that despite the chaos around us, that he is still in control, and that we have everything we need to conquer this virus in the Catholic Church. I have a great resource chapter in the book that's really helpful for people. And I say conquering coronavirus through your circumstances, individual circumstances. And I look at the unemployed. I talk about my own experience of being knocked off my high horse. I look at the frontline folks, the medical employees and law enforcement. I look at the elderly. I look at families. And so each person or each segment of society that's been really, really impacted by COVID, there's a special section in the book with prayers and both secular and Catholic resources. Then, most importantly, at the end, we have a whole devotional chapter. But speaking of churches, my publisher, Sophia, is working to give a big discount to churches if they want to buy, say, 250 books. So if they go to sophiainstitute.com and talk to them about ordering it, they will give you a nice discount. When I was doing a recent interview again with Dr. Flanagan, he's a deacon and a doctor working with the bishops on this issue. I gave him the manuscript several weeks ago, and I said, Doc, I just want your opinion on this. You're a deacon and you're a medical doctor. What do you think? And I interviewed him, and it was just recent. In the middle of the interview, he said, I'm going to embarrass you. And I'm thinking, what is he talking about? I never brought up the book. And out of the blue, he said, everybody, because we were talking about the latest that was happening with COVID. And he said, every pastor needs this book, and they should buy a box and they should give it to parishioners as a gift when they walk in and walk back to Mass. Because now we're starting, Craig, to see the churches open again. Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to be seeing is people still having a lot of questions about things. So I think it would be a great resource for the parish and a great resource for individuals. And they can just go to sophiainstitute.com to get the book.
I agree. Listen, if they can carry Matthew Kelly's book, I've seen in every parish, I think they could. Because like you said, people have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, a lot of fears. And sometimes we feel uncomfortable asking. Nobody wants to raise their hand and say, I got a question. How do I pray the Our Father? Should I be afraid? Be full of fear? What are good websites? Because if I Google something, the first thing that's not going to come up is EWTN. It's going to be secular, conspiracy theory. So I know a lot of parishes, a lot of bishops. I think you should all pick up tons of these books, mail them to your parishioners. This was a fantastic book. Like I said, I read it in a day, which I don't promote books just to promote them, but it has been honestly a pleasure to speak with you. I was looking forward to this interview. This was a wonderful time. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question before you go. What part of Italy is your family from?
So my last name is Tubiolo, which nobody can pronounce, including myself. So I took my grandmother's, which was Syracusa. They were from Syracusa, Italy. So I have that last name, which I had a devotion to my grandmother, Mary, who had a devotion to Mary and church. And my father's last name is Tubiolo. So it's Naples, and it's also Taormina.
Sicily. Beautiful.
Sicily, yeah. Napolitan. So we went back a couple of years ago to visit. I love Italy.
Did you get to Taormina?
Yes, I did. Naples.
Bella.
We had our honeymoon in Venice. We always said we'd go back, but who knows if we'll ever go back.
You have to come back with me because I have a whole ministry to Italy travel. So God willing, when it opens up again. But my family is also south. My father's family, Calabria, Reggio. And my mother's father was from the Naples area. And her mother was from Basilicata in a little town called Anzi. So everybody's south. And my husband is also 100% Italian from Abruzzo and Naples. So it's a beautiful country. Beautiful. I
would be more than happy to go back to Italy anytime. And I'm off into that.
Let's do a pilgrimage.
I would love to. I'll bring my 4-year-old son. He wants to go.
I love babies. I
would love to go.
I'll take care of him.
I'm going to take you up on that offer. So.
Thank you so much. This has been really, really nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Like I said, pick up a copy. If you're looking for something to read, pick up a copy. And always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through words and actions. God bless.